Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're going to be getting on with a Jeep Commando 4-seater. It's similar to the 2-seater just done, except we're going to have a roll cage instead of a cab, and we're going to be matching this up to an SSD chassis. Alright, so let's get started. So this version of the Jeep Commando is a 4-seater without a roof. However, it does have a roll cage. So here I'm using stainless steel capillary tubing along with some scale metal supply tabs. I recently switched to this vise mounted tubing bender. I was able to get pretty good bends with my handheld bender, but this allows me to get bends that are repeatable. I also have the option of changing the radius of the bends. To mount the cage to the body, I use the scale metal supply tabs. In the past, I would have just added silver solder to the inside of the tube and tapped the hole back to an M3 thread. Using the tabs is a much faster way and gives a much more solid mount. The body and roof of the Jeepster is pretty unique, so I wanted to make the cage have a similar look. The cage tapers up toward the rear and follows the angles of the tailgate. I also curved it around the end slightly. Once you get the cage mounted in the body, pieces can be taped in place and brazed with silver solder. It's always best to do this with the cage in place, but there is a risk that the body can get damaged. I try to minimize this by only tacking one piece down and removing it to finish off the joints. With the cage mostly finished, I switched to filling in small imperfections with Tamiya putty. I tend to do this in stages, since it doesn't make sense to get the body too perfect in case it gets damaged when other work takes place. There isn't a lot of detail on the outside, but I take the time to finish them off. One thing to do is drill holes for the door handles. I also have to dremel out a hole for the fuel filler neck. These pieces fit into holes, but the remainder will just be glued on place after the paint is finished. Another step is to finalize the shape for things like sides, fenders, and the bottom. Many of these are left a little long and trimmed back once all the pieces are put in place. A Dremel and foam sanding block make quick work of this, and any small imperfections can be filled in and sanded back later. I've tried several different techniques for making vents on windshield cowls. I cut them by hand, use my Cricut machine to cut thin styrene, but the best I have found is a 3D resin print them. Here I am cutting an opening so I can glue in place a vent opening. Care has to be taken to make sure it is in the right spot as well as square. Things like this can easily be noticed, even if they are slightly askew. I also take the time to drill the holes for the windshield wipers. The door panels and dash were painted the body color first, and then masked off to get the accent colors applied. For the door panel, I went with a darker blue, and for the dash, I thought about black, but decided at the last minute to go with the same dark blue. I really love the contrast of the two colors, and both are very pretty. Many of the pieces are chromed, and my preferred paint is the Molotow. It goes on better from an airbrush, but it's not too bad from just brushing it by hand. Most of the details I add to the interior, such as knobs, radios, handles, etc., are made separately and added later. There are a few reasons for this. One is the paint buildup for these small pieces will make them look somewhat unrealistic. It isn't much, but the radius caused by the paint just makes it look more toy-like. The other reason is they are infinitely easier to paint when they're separate. Where it doesn't make sense, I just have to take my time using a small brush and magnifiers to get the details painted. So one of the coolest parts of this build are the emblems, but they are a royal pain to paint. As you can see, I keep them on the 3D print supports and make several of them. Chances are I will get one or two of them to turn out okay. I wanted the seats two-tone, so I started with the lightest color and sprayed the dark color last. Small details that need to be glued on are saved for the very last minute. I wait until I have the body sanded to 320 grit before gluing them in place. This makes it easier to sand and keeps me from tearing them up along the way. It only takes a second with 120 grit sandpaper to ruin a 3D printed part. I don't always get the chance to mount these bodies to the chassis, but here I was given the chance with an SSD Trail King kit. In order to get the sliders to match up with the body, I had to do some slight trimming to the mounts. Once the hole in the slider post was slotted, they slid in just enough to look correct. So the body is very close to resting directly on the sliders. However, I wanted to make some mounts that would raise it up just a bit. I also wanted the body to come off quickly, since the battery would be mounted in the rear under the body. I start with aluminum angle pieces that were cut down and bolted to the chassis rails. I added Velcro to the body and the aluminum pieces. This gives a solid platform for the body to rest, and the Velcro will hold it firmly in place. With the rear mostly sorted, I switched to the front. The servo had to be moved back since the grille lives right where the SSD chassis has the servo to be mounted. After some careful measurements, an aluminum plate was cut out that moved the servo almost against the scale motor. So the geometry is affected slightly, but there isn't any noticeable bump steer. I'm not sure if this front bumper skirt came on all Jeepsters, but I thought it looked really cool. Another bonus is it covers up the chassis, which sticks out a good bit before the grille. A sheet of styrene is cut and glued in place to the grille. To add additional details, half-round styrene shapes were glued down to match the pattern of the real one. The bumper skirt also allows me to add some additional structure to the grille, which really stiffened up the front. As mentioned, the battery will live in the rear, so a simple styrene box is glued together. The box slips between the chassis rails, and after some trial and error, the box is positioned so it will not interfere with the axle when it cycles up. The battery box isn't huge, but for having such a detailed interior, I am pretty happy with its size. After making inner fenders on my F-250 build, I knew all opening hoods in the future would require them. They just add so much scale realism to the build. I probably need to start adding more detail to the firewall, but one thing at a time. MDF pieces are glued together and quickly shaped for both inner fender molds. These molds are used to vacuum form styrene, and after some careful trimming, can be glued in place. I also needed a way to cover up the servo. Luckily, the Jeepster has a pretty large fan cowl, so I shaped up some more MDF in preparation for vacuum forming one. Angles were placed in the mold to clear the headlight buckets, just like the real one. After cutting away the center, there isn't much left, but it does a good job of hiding the servo. I ended up with several small pieces for attaching the body and servo, as well as the battery tray. These were all removed and painted with a flat black to make them kind of disappear. After mounting back up the painted pieces, I switched over to getting the electronics in place. I have a lot of room under the floorboard, but it has to be laid out carefully to avoid fouling on the body or the running gear. Mostly what I'm doing is just shortening up wires by soldering on new connectors and crimping on new ends. With the electronics mostly sorted, I moved back to under the hood. Originally I agreed to just have an opening hood. However, after seeing how well it is turning out, I decided to add a few more details. One is a radiator, which is cut so it fits around the servo. The servo is wrapped with black friction tape, and a transmission cooler is glued onto the front. When you look in from the grill slats, the servo will disappear due to the tape, but the radiator and cooler will stand out. A simple battery tray was fabbed up to hold a 3D resin printed battery. One of the things I notice about real Jeepsters is there are support rods running from the firewall to the grill. I was able to make these with a few scraps of styrene and some metal rod from survey signs. Once glued in place, it looks the part and adds structural support. Now that I'm satisfied all the body mods are finished, another coat of color can be sprayed on the body. I've been doing a lot more with flocking lately and decided to buy some dark blue flocking for the carpet. Lots of masking is required, but the end result gives that extra level of realism. Some of the last things to do are paint in the details. I also added in the stickers to the battery. These are made by just printing pictures and adding clear coat. I probably need to get a sticker sheets one day, but I haven't tried out that yet. The chrome on the headlight lens is painted with the Molotov paint. Once all the details are painted and dried, I use a CA glue to put them in place on the body. All of these need to be tried out first. The last thing you need to do is have glue on a part and find out it doesn't fit. A few of the larger items, such as seats and the roll cage, are bolted in place. I do my best to make mechanical connections for these, since they have a tendency to be more stable over time. The very last thing to do for the body is finish up the electronics. This is accomplished by wiring in some LEDs for the headlights and taillights. The system is pretty simple, since they are just ran off the balance/battery spot on the receiver. When you set up the LEDs, you just need to work with whatever voltage is supplied by the BEC inside your ESC. Building these two Jeepster Commandos has been a lot of fun. It's exciting to have a unique vehicle and be able to make it look so different. There are quite a few fun builds coming up, and perhaps I will even make a non-Jeep one day. Until then, I'll see you on the rocks.
Yeah.